Clara Reed drove the last shovelful of earth onto her husband's fresh grave. The Texas sun was relentless, showing no mercy for the living or the dead. As she stood there, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching a single wilting wildflower, she made a silent vow over the scorched ground. She would not let this unforgiving land claim another good soul. She would not stand by while wickedness prospered and decency was buried deep. She didn't know that her resolve was about to be tested, that just a few miles away, in a dusty auction yard, a man's life was about to be sold for less than the price of a horse, and her vow would demand a price she never imagined paying. The sun beat down on Briar Hollow's auction yard, a circle of baked earth and hard judgment. It was a place where livestock and lost dreams were sold to the highest bidder. And on that sweltering afternoon, a man's future was on the block. He was slumped on the platform, a man broken by betrayal, his shoulder leaking blood into the Texas dust. His own brother had cast him aside, like a lame horse. So when the widow, Clara Reed, made her way through the crowd, a murmur followed her like a shadow. She was a figure in black, her belly swollen with a child yet to be born, her face a mask of quiet sorrow. Folks figured grief had finally cracked her mind. A pregnant woman, alone, had no business at a place like this, but Clara's eyes weren't lost in sorrow, they were flint. When the auctioneer called for bids and the wounded man's brother gave him one last cruel kick, something in her steeled over before anyone could draw another breath. Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the heat. The gavel's echo was the final word. Sold to the woman in mourning clothes, she moved with a purpose that parted the sea of gawking faces. The man who'd lost the bid, a brute with a stained hat and malice in his eyes, blocked her path. He spat on the ground. "You just bought a heap of trouble, ma'am." He made to kick the wounded rancher again, but Clara was faster than a striking snake. The iron rib of her parasol cracked hard against the man's shin. He howled, clutching his leg. "You lay another hand on him," she said, her voice low and cutting, "and I'll own you before sundown. You'll learn the real meaning of hard labor." The crowd went dead silent. Clara turned her gaze to the auctioneer. "Cut his bonds." "I need their names," the auctioneer, a man weary of the world's injustices, cleared his throat. "That's Micah Callen, a good rancher." Till his kin turned on him, the little ones, their Lahi and June. Clara knelt, her black dress pooling in the dust. She looked at the two small girls, trembling and barefoot, their eyes far too old for their years. "Lahi June," she said, her voice softening for the first time. "My name is Clara. You're coming home." The ride back to her homestead was shrouded in silence. Micah drifted on a tide of pain and fever. The jostle of the wagon, a distant torture. He remembered his brother's sneer. Then a woman's sharp command, and now the scent of lavender soap fighting the smell of dust and old blood. He woke to candlelight. The sheets beneath him were clean, the air still. A basin of reddened water sat on a nearby table, testament to the care he'd been given. He tried to rise, but a bolt of fire in his side sent him back down. Clara appeared in the doorway, a tray in her hands. "You're in my spare room," she stated simply. "I've stitched you up as best I could. Don't move." He stared at her, his mind struggling to catch up. "Why?" The word was a dry rasp. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered deep in her eyes. "Because I wasn't put on this earth to stand by while good men are destroyed by wickedness." She set the tray down. "Your daughters are asleep in my sewing room, on the cot and in the cradle meant for the baby." The unspoken grief hung heavy and real between them. He looked away, the shame of physical weight. "I have nothing, not a penny, not even a name worth keeping." "A man's got to have a name," she said, her tone softening just a fraction. "You can use mine for a while, until you find your own again." That night, Lahi whispered to her little sister in the dark. "Why did she do it?" June asked. Lahi could only answer, "I don't know, but she smells like Mama used to." Micah's fever broke with the dawn. He opened his eyes to see Clara knitting in a chair at the foot of his bed. her fingers moving with a quiet determination. He saw the old buried sorrow in the faint swelling around her eyes. "You lost your husband," he stated, not a question. She gave a single sharp nod. "A Comanche arrow. 2 months passed before we knew about the child." "I'm sorry," he managed. She met his gaze. "He was a good man, and love like that doesn't vanish. It just finds a new shape." Micah felt a tremor in his hand. How could he ever repay this? "You don't," she answered his unspoken thought. "You just protect your daughters. That will be payment enough. But peace is a fleeting thing in that land." That night, a sharp knock rattled the cabin door. It was the sheriff, flanked by 2 armed deputies. "Ma'am," the sheriff said, tipping his hat, "we have an order. Micah Callen and his children were sold illegally by next of kin. We've come to take them into custody." Clara stood like a mountain. "And you believe I'll simply hand them over?" "The law's the law, ma'am. Then the law can sit on my porch till morning," she replied, her voice ringing with defiance, "while we discuss the meaning of decency, because I've already buried 1 man. I will not lose these 3. Let them in." Clara, Micah was standing in the hall, pale and unsteady, but holding an old pistol. "This is my burden. I'll speak with them." He returned 10 minutes later, his face ashen. Clara caught him as he swayed. "They're giving me 5 days, he whispered, his breath catching. 5 days to prove the girls are better off here, or they'll be taken." Clara felt the air leave her lungs. Micah looked her square in the eye, his gaze filled with a desperate, stark clarity. "There is one way," he said, his voice raspy. "One way to make the law see them as protected. If they were the children of your husband, no one could lay a claim." The words hung in the air. A proposal born not of romance, but of raw survival. "You don't know me," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I know you stood up when the whole world looked away," he answered. "I know you bought a man's life with what little you had." He took a pained breath. My heart is buried with my wife. There's nothing left in me to give a woman." He met her glistening eyes. "But you're carrying grief, and so am I, maybe. Maybe we can carry it together. Maybe where kindness is planted, something like love can grow." He wasn't asking for salvation. He was offering a shield, his name to protect her children, her home to protect his, in the heavy silence of the small cabin, surrounded by the ghosts of what they had lost. Clara Reed looked at the broken man before her and saw the start of a new beginning. She gave a single tearful nod. 3 days later, they stood before Reverend Tobias in the quiet of the parlor. There was no music, no guests, just Clara in a pale blue dress from a time before grief, and Micah in a borrowed shirt that hung loose on his wounded frame. The girls stood as silent witnesses, their eyes wide with questions they didn't know how to ask. The Reverend's words were not about romance, but about refuge. "Do you vow to protect one another in this crucible of hardship?" "I do," Micah said, his voice low and firm. "I do," Clara whispered, her hand tightening in his. "And these children," the Reverend said, his gaze full of understanding, "will you shield them as your own, against all danger?" "We will." They answered in unison. That night they were husband and wife, but they sat like strangers at the kitchen table, the silence between them a heavy blanket. "You don't have to stay in the house," Clara said suddenly. "If this is too much, the barn is warm." Micah looked up, his eyes clear. "Do I seem like a man who runs from his vows?" "No," she admitted. "You seem like a man who could be crushed by them." He leaned forward, the firelight catching the pain in his face. "My own brother did this. He stole my land and threw my daughters to wolves because I wouldn't let him use them for pity." His voice broke. "I failed them. You didn't fail them," she said, her voice fierce. "You survived, you held on. That is not failure. That is defiance." He stared at her, a long searching look. "You always talk like that?" "Only when I see someone worth fighting for." The next morning, a letter was nailed to their door. The scrawled words were a poison dart. "Your paper marriage won't fool me. The girls are mine. I'm coming for what's mine. It was signed Elias, Micah's. Face went dark. His brother. Clara took the note, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the flames of the hearth. We are not afraid of him, she said. Micah didn't answer. He just moved his chair closer to the table where the pistol lay. That afternoon, a small voice broke the quiet. Mama Clara? It was Lahi. It was the first time she had called her that. Clara knelt, her heart catching in her throat. Yes, sweetheart? When the baby comes, can I help? You helped us. I want to help you. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes as she pulled the small girl into her arms, holding her tight. You never have to earn your place here, she whispered. You already belong. But belonging was a fragile thing. Elias came back on the 6th night, a whirlwind of whiskey and rage. Crashed through the back door while Micah was in the barn. He had a gun in his hand. You think you can just take what belongs to me? He snarled, his eyes wild. They were never yours to own. Clara cried, instinctively shielding her belly. I think. A low voice growled from the doorway. The girls have already chosen who they belong to. It was Micah. Elias spun around. Look at you, patched up by a woman, hiding behind her skirts. You're not even a man anymore. Micah raised the rifle. His voice was a low growl. Put it down, Elias. Elias just laughed. A cruel, broken sound, and brought his own pistol up. A single shot tore through the silence. Elias staggered, and then he fell. The rifle smoke hung in the air. Lahi screamed from the hallway. June began to sob. Micah stood trembling, the weapon still in his hands. Clara moved in an instant, gathering the crying girls behind her. Don't look, she commanded in a fierce whisper. You don't look. Micah dropped the rifle, his breathing ragged. He was going to. He would have killed you. I know, Clara said, her hand finding his. But now we must shield them from this. Micah fell to his knees, the weight of it all crashing down. But then, a small figure stepped out of the shadows. Lahi wrapped her thin arms around Micah's neck. You didn't fail us, Papa, she whispered into his shoulder. You saved us. And for the first time in years, Micah wept. Not from weakness, but because a dam of ice deep inside him had finally cracked, letting in the first faint glimmer of light. Before the sun crested the hills, a new grave was dug on the homestead. Micah worked alone, his movements stiff, his face a mask of grim duty. He wouldn't accept help. This was a burden he had to carry himself. Clara watched from the porch, a silent sentinel in the cold morning air. When he was done, she stepped forward. You did what was necessary, she said softly. His eyes were haunted. He was my blood. No, Clara's voice was firm. A rock in the swirling tide of his grief. He stopped being your brother when he threatened a child. We bury the past, Micah, and we raise the living. But the past cast a long shadow. The girls moved through the house like ghosts, the laughter gone from their eyes. The silence was heavy, suffocating. So Clara made a decision. Today, she announced, her voice brighter than the mood. We are going to clean the porch. Lahi looked at her confused. Why? Because the sun is shining, Clara said. And we have lived in the dark for too long. So they scrubbed. They hauled buckets of water and soap, and worked until their sleeves were soaked and their faces were flush with effort. And then it happened. Clara playfully splashed June with a handful of suds. A small giggle escaped June's lips. The first one since the gunshot. It was a fragile sound, but it broke the spell that night. As Clara sat by their bed, she felt a shift deep in her soul. These weren't just guests she was protecting. They were bone of her bone, heart of her heart. They were hers. But word travels fast in a small town. 3 days later, the sheriff was back on their porch, his hat in his hands, his face troubled. It ain't the law this time, Micah, the sheriff said slowly. It's talk, his cousin stirring up trouble in town, saying you married the widow just to keep the girls, and then ambushed Elias in cold blood. Clara stepped out from behind the screen door. That is a lie. I know it, ma'am, the sheriff said, his eyes kind. But lies can sound like truth in a courtroom. especially when the only other witnesses are two scared children. He sighed. Run, and you'll look guilty. Stay, and you need more than my good word. You need proof. A witness who saw Elias threaten you. Micah's jaw tightened, but Clara's mind was already racing. There is one person, Clara said softly. The woman in the apothecary, she warned me. Her name was Ruthie Bell. A widow with eyes that missed nothing and a tongue as sharp as a razor. Clara found her amongst her jars of herbs and roots. I heard, Ruthie said without looking. Up, I need your memory, Ruthie. The old woman finally met her gaze. That's a dangerous thing to ask for. You saw him in the store that day. Clara pressed. You heard what he said about the girls. Ruthie's lips pursed. I did, and it made my skin crawl. Would you say that in front of a judge? Ruthie studied her for a long moment. You're asking me to stick my neck out. I'm asking you to help me keep two little girls safe. A flicker of respect, of understanding, softened Ruthie's hard gaze. You're not just fighting, are you, child? She muttered, You're protecting. That's a whole other kind of dangerous. She sighed. All right, I'll do it. The hearing was held in a small, stuffy room, before a judge with a hard face and weary eyes. He listened to the sheriff. He listened to Ruthie's sharp, clear testimony about the threats Elias had made. Then Micah took the stand. He looked not at the judge, but at Clara. I didn't kill him over a piece of paper, Micah said, his voice steady. I killed him because he raised a gun to my wife, to my children. He wasn't coming to take them. He was coming to destroy everything we were trying to build. And this marriage? The judge asked, his voice sharp. This marriage was born from hardship. Your Honor, Micah said, but it is more real than anything I have ever known. Those girls, they are mine by love. And if that's all the law will grant me, I'll take it. The courtroom was utterly still. The judge shuffled his papers, his face unreadable. Then he looked up. I find no cause to prosecute. The marriage is legal. Custody stands. Case dismissed. And when the gavel fell this time, it did not sound like a gunshot. It sounded like mercy. They rode home under a sky bruised with twilight, their hands clasped between them. That night, for the first time in years, Hope felt less like a distant stranger and more like a guest at their table. We're a family, Micah had said, his hand resting over hers on the gentle curve of her belly, and in the flickering lamplight, Clara believed it. But peace in that land is a fragile seed, easily crushed. 2 nights later, Micah went to check the fence line. He never came back. Clara knew something was wrong when the midnight hour came and went. She sat by the window, a cold cup of tea in her hand, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. At 3 a.m, the sound of a single horse broke the stillness. It was the sheriff. His face, pale in the moonlight, told her everything before he even spoke a word. The silence was worse than a scream. Tell me. She gripped the doorframe. He's alive, the sheriff said quickly. Barely ambushed near the creek. Someone hit him from behind and left him for dead in the snow. Clara didn't cry. The shock was too cold, too deep. She simply gathered her shawl and rode with the sheriff into the biting wind, leaving her sleeping girls with a kiss and a prayer. At the ranch, Lahi woke to a silent house. On the table, a note in Clara's hand. Micah's hurt. Be brave. Leahy's heart seized. June, she whispered, shaking her sister. We have to hide. They ran to the old root cellar, the secret place Micah had shown them. It was damp and smelled of earth, but it was safe. Clara returned after noon to an empty home. No fire, no laughter, just a trail of small, muddy footprints leading from the back door into the woods. A raw scream tore from her throat. Back in the cellar, the girls shivered in the dark. Then they heard it. A man's voice, slick and sweet. You girls in there? I just want to talk. Then a low, cruel laugh. Well, if you won't come out, maybe this match will change your mind. A thud. A man's yelp. Another thud. Then silence. The cellar door creaked open, spilling sunlight into the darkness. Standing there, a pitchfork in her hands and fury in her eyes, was Ruthie Bell. Got a feeling something wasn't right, the old woman muttered, helping the trembling girls out into the fresh air. Heard that snake talking to himself by the well, so I took care of him. Micah woke 3 days later. The first thing he saw was Clara's face, then Lai, asleep in a chair, and June, curled at her feet. We're still here. Clara smiled through her tears. He reached for her hand. I thought I lost everything. You almost did, she said. But we fought back, all of us. And just as the family began to breathe again, a telegram arrived. It was addressed to Micah. The words on the paper felt like a lightning strike. I know who killed your brother, and it wasn't you. Micah stared at the words, his world tilting on its axis. No return address, just a stamp from Sweetwater Junction, 80 miles west. If someone knows the truth, Micah said, his voice barely a whisper, then they've been watching, and that means we're not safe, not yet. Then we find them, Clara said, her resolve like steel. Together, a week later, they rode west, leaving the girls in the watchful care of Ruthie Bell. Sweetwater Junction was a crooked town clinging to the edge of a river. The telegraph clerk told them a man had paid in silver to have the message written by hand. Didn't want his name on it, the clerk said. Just told me to tell you. If you came looking, ask for the woman in the green shack by the river bend. The shack leaned, tired and weathered, under an old willow tree. A woman with sharp blue eyes watched them approach. I was wondering when you'd get here, she said. He's inside, hiding like a coward. The man inside was hunched and thin, a ghost of the man Micah once knew. When he turned, Micah's breath caught in his throat. Jeremiah? It was his cousin, a boy he thought had died in the fire that took his brother. That took everything. I was there, Micah, Jeremiah whispered, his voice cracking with the guilt of a decade. I was part of it, but I swear to you, I never fired my rifle. You stood with them. Micah's voice was a low growl. The men who murdered my brother. I was 17. I thought we were just claiming back land. I didn't know until it was too late. Tears streamed down Jeremiah's face. He didn't scream in pain, Micah. He screamed for you. He kept yelling. He's just a boy, let him run. Jeremiah looked down at his own gloved hand. He pulled it off, revealing a gnarled, burned stump. I tried to talk, but the man who led it all, Wade Harmon, he had the whole county in his pocket. He sent men to silence me. This is what's left. He looked up, his eyes pleading. I've been hiding ever since. But when I heard they blamed you, I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I wrote it all down. Every name, every detail, it's all buried out back. Micah stared at the man, the weight of 10 years of undeserved shame pressing down on him. You let me rot, Micah said, his voice thick with pain. And now you want peace? Jeremiah shook his head. No, Micah, I don't want peace. I just want to stop hiding and maybe help you find yours. It was all there, wrapped in oilskin and buried in a rusted tin box. The truth had waited for 10 years. Page after page of a dead man's confession. Names Micah hadn't dared to think of in years. Dates, locations, bribes, the entire rotten conspiracy. Laid bare in shaky, desperate handwriting, it changed everything. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of grief or fear, but of heavy, settled purpose. Micah had a plan. He didn't speak of it. He just held Clara's hand by the campfire each night and looked at the horizon. His eyes fixed on the home that was waiting. He waited until Sunday. He dressed in his cleanest clothes, his face clean-shaven. He walked into church with Clara on his arm and his daughters at his side. The whole town watched them come, the singing faltered, whispers died on the air. They sat near the front, a silent, unbreakable unit. When the last hymn was sung, Micah stood. A hush fell over the congregation. Folks, he said, his voice strong and clear, carrying to the back of the small church, I have something to say. I know what most of you in this room have thought of me for 10 years. You believed I was a killer, that I let my own brother burn. His gaze swept over them, unflinching. I never said otherwise. I figured the truth was a currency this town wasn't interested in. He reached into his coat and pulled out the oilskin bundle. But the truth has a way of finding the light. He walked to the front and laid the records on the altar. This, he said, his voice ringing with the weight of a decade of pain, is a full confession from a man who stood with Wade Harmon. The day my brother was murdered. A gasp rippled through the room. It names every man who fired a gun that day, and it names every man in power who helped bury their crime. His voice rose, steady and powerful. I didn't come here for vengeance. I came for my girls, for the woman who saved my life, for the child we will bring into this world. I want them to grow up in a town that knows the truth matters. Sheriff Barrow stepped forward, his face grim. Micah, may I? Micah nodded. The sheriff flipped through the brittle pages, his expression darkening with every name he read. Where is the man who wrote this? He asked, his voice low. He is under protection, Clara answered from her seat. And if any harm comes to him, copies of these records will find their way to the state marshal. The sheriff gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then, he said, his voice leaving no room for doubt, we have work to do. By the end of the week, the town had been turned upside down. 4 men were in chains. 2 more had resigned from their posts in disgrace. And for the first time in a decade, Micah Callen could walk down the main street without feeling the burn of accusation on his back. Men who once crossed the road to avoid him now tipped their hats. Good to see you, Micah. Good to be seen. He'd reply, a small, weary smile on his face. That night, a storm rolled in. The rain washing the dust from the world, Micah stood on the porch with Clara. His arms wrapped around her from behind as they watched the lightning flash across the hills. I never thought I'd see this day, he whispered into her hair. You never stopped fighting for it. She said, I had given up, he admitted. His voice thick. When they took my name, I was just a ghost. Clara leaned back against him. Then I'm glad I married a ghost, she whispered, because you gave me life when I thought mine was over. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her cheeks, and he kissed her, not with the desperation of their vows, but with the slow, certain grace of a man coming home. From the shadows of the doorway, Leahy whispered to June, that's the smile Papa used to have when he'd listen to Mama sing. The town's respect, once lost, began to return in small, quiet ways. A basket of fresh eggs left on the porch, a freshly baked pie. Men who had once looked through him now met his eye and nodded. The apology clear in their silent gestures, Micah accepted it all with a quiet grace that asked for nothing more. The healing was happening inside the house, too. The girls' laughter was no longer a fragile sound, but a constant, joyful rhythm. One evening, June, ever thoughtful, looked up from her mending. Papa still has bad dreams sometimes, she said to Clara. Will the new babies crying wake him? From the hallway, Micah heard Clara's gentle reply. I think, sweetheart, that your papa's nightmares have finally started to sleep, too. He had to turn away so they wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. Then, word came from the county seat. The land that had been stolen from his father, the very land Wade Harmon built his legacy of lies upon, was being returned. It was his. Micah, Clara whispered, clutching his arm. Your family's land, he nodded, peering at the distant hills. Then it's time we built a new home. They stood together on the scorched earth where his first home had been. Only the stone chimney remained, a lonely monument to all he had lost. We won't build here, he said, touching the cold, ashen ground. This place holds too much pain. We'll build nearby, where the morning sun can find us, but the chimney stays, a reminder of what came before. Clara squeezed his hand. Then let's build it together. That night, she doubled over in pain, a contraction for a moment. The old terror seized Micah, the memory of his first wife, Sarah, of losing everything in a haze of blood and fear. But he looked at Clara, at the fierce strength in her eyes, and the fear subsided, replaced by a steady calm. It was a false alarm. But as he tucked her into bed, her hand in his, he knew this time would be different. A few days later, the sheriff arrived with a letter. Harmon's last son had been arrested. The long shadow was finally gone, but there was more. "It's from the governor," the sheriff said, a small smile on his face. "They've heard about you, Micah. They want to know if you'd consider running for county commissioner." Micah stared at the official seal, speechless. The man they once called a killer was now being asked to lead. He found Clara in the half-finished frame of the new nursery. He didn't have to speak. She read the letter, her eyes wide. "You are exactly the man for the job, Micah Callen," she said, her voice full of pride. "And I will stand beside you every step of the way." That evening, they sat on the porch, the girls asleep at their sides, the stars thick in the velvet sky. "You know," Micah said quietly, watching the horizon, "I used to think the Lord only took things away, but He doesn't just restore what was lost. Sometimes He gives you something you never even knew you needed." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "And sometimes," she whispered, "He gives it back sevenfold." He reached for her hand, holding it against his heart. "Then let's build this life, Clara, from the ashes." Before he could finish, she gasped, her hand gripping his arm like a vice. "I think, Micah," she said, her voice tight but steady, "I think it's time." He carried her into the house, his steps sure and steady. There was no fear in him now, only faith. The midwife, Martha, arrived like a calm storm, her presence filling the small room with purpose. Micah stood by Clara's side, holding her hand, whispering prayers, his strength, her anchor through the long, dark hours. And then, just before dawn, a new sound broke the stillness, a thin, reedy cry that grew stronger, filling the house, filling their world. Martha smiled, her old eyes wet with tears, and placed a small, squirming bundle into Clara's waiting arms. "It's a boy," she said. Micah dropped to his knees, his heart overflowing. A son, a wife who lived, and 2 daughters in the doorway, laughing and crying all at once. "What will we name him?" Clara whispered, exhausted but glowing. Micah looked at the tiny, perfect face of his son. "Elias," he said softly, "not for the man his brother became, but for the brother who died trying to save him." The next morning, Micah stood on the porch of their new life, cradling his son as the sun rose over their land. The ranch was breathing again, not just surviving, but thriving. The land was officially theirs within the month. They finished the house, its wide windows open to the light. Every nail, every board, was a promise kept. Years passed. Lahi grew into a fearless writer. June discovered a gift for music, her hymns filling the house with peace. And Elias learned to walk, his first word, Mama, but his second, Papa. One night, long after the children were asleep, Clara found Micah in the rocking chair, holding the small quilt they had first wrapped their son in. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. He looked up, his eyes full of a peace she had helped him find. "About how the Lord never forgot me. Even when I was lost in the dark, He was leading me right here to you." She knelt beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "He was leading me to you too," she smiled. "You know, I never told you, the day I bought you at that auction. I had no plan, I just looked at you, and a voice inside me said, 'That man needs saving.' But I was wrong." She looked him in the eye. "I didn't save you, Micah. We saved each other." He pulled her close, and in the quiet of their home, they listened to the sound of the wind in the cottonwood trees. For in a land where pain had once ruled, love had finally put down roots.